The first rays of dawn stretched lazily over the weathered rooftops of Haven's Hollow, painting the wooden sidewalks in pale gold. Dust rose in soft swirls along the empty streets, carrying the faint aroma of prairie grass and smoke from the bakers' ovens. A church bell tolled somewhere in the distance, its echo drifting over the town like a fragile whisper. Emma stood just outside the massive wooden doors, her hands clutching the worn shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The fabric was thin, fraying at the edges, but it offered her some sense of security against the invisible weight pressing upon her. Her gaze lingered on the threshold, but she couldn't bring herself to step inside. The memories of scornful eyes and whispered accusations from her past hand, the judgment she expected from this small congregation, coiled around her heart like barbed wire. Her dress, simple and cotton, concealed what little she could, but even so, the roundness of her belly made every step feel heavier than the one before. She adjusted the shawl again, tugging it closer, and pressed her lips together as a shiver ran through her. A stray kitten darted across the path, and instinctively, Emma knelt, reaching for it. Her fingers brushed the soft fur, and she smiled faintly, a fragile gesture of life amidst judgment. Nearby, a bundle of flowers had tumbled from a wooden cart. She stooped to gather them, brushing the dirt from the petals, before placing them carefully back on the wagon. These small acts, unseen by most, were her shield of quiet defiance against the whispers of a town that might not yet forgive her. Her thoughts drifted, involuntarily, to her family. Her father's disappointed gaze, the cold dismissal of her siblings, the harsh words that had forced her from home, it all replayed like a relentless wind in her mind. The memory tightened her chest and made the church doors seem impossibly far away. Then came the sound of hooves, soft at first, then striking the wooden sidewalks with a steady rhythm. Emma's head lifted, eyes searching the source, and she found him, Luke, a cowboy with a calm, measured presence. Dust clung to his boots, and the brim of his hat shaded a face marked by sun and patience. But it was his eyes that caught her, the quiet, steady gaze that seemed to see her, really see her. Without judgment, their eyes met across the dusty square, and for a single heartbeat, the world shrank to just the two of them. The murmurs of imagined gossip, the weight of shame, even the distant toll of the belaw faded into background noise. Luke's voice broke the spell, low and warm, carrying across the few steps that separated them. "God knows you're mine," he said. His words were neither boastful nor possessive. They were a quiet, steady declaration, as simple and profound as the prairie itself. Emma felt a shiver of warmth coil through her chest, curiosity blooming amid the fear. Was it possible to be seen, to be accepted, even in the face of shame? For the first time that morning, she allowed her gaze to linger, meeting his without lowering her eyes. A small spark of hope threaded through the tension, delicate yet undeniable. The town beyond might whisper, and the church doors might seem unapproachable. But here, in this charged moment with a quiet, steadfast man, Emma realized she might not be as alone as she had believed. The wind shifted, scattering dust across the wooden boards. Emma drew a slow breath, feeling the first trace of courage stir within her. She still trembled, and the shadows of doubt lingered. But something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, God had placed him here for a reason. And for the first time, Emma considered stepping forward. Emma lingered at the edge of the churchyard long after the morning bell had faded, her fingers tracing the grain of the weathered fence as if it could anchor her courage. The town seemed both vast and claustrophobic, rows of barns, crooked fences, and shuttered windows, all whispering judgment she could almost hear. Every step along the dusty road felt heavy, burdened by both her growing belly and the invisible eyes she imagined following her. She slipped into a quiet grove just beyond the town limits, where the prairie stretched in soft, rolling waves of golden grass. The wind tugged gently at her hair and dress, carrying with it the distant scent of sage and wildflowers. She sank to the ground, drawing her knees to her chest, and pulled out a small leather journal. Her pencil scratched softly across the page, spilling thoughts she could not voice aloud, her fear of shame, her longing for acceptance, and the quiet hope that perhaps she might still find it. Between the lines of ink, she whispered prayers, barely audible, carried away on the prairie wind. Meanwhile, Luke had begun to show himself in the rhythms of her life, without ever forcing attention. One morning, she found freshly baked bread on her doorstep, the aroma mingling with the crisp dawn air. Another day, he appeared with a bundle of firewood, setting it neatly by her cabin with a silent nod. Even a rickety fence, bowing under the weight of winter storms, was repaired by the time she stepped outside the next morning. Each action was deliberate, measured, and without expectation, earning her cautious trust. On long rides through the prairie, Luke shared fragments of his own past losses that had shaped him, hardships endured in silence. He spoke softly, never pressing, letting his words settle like seeds in fertile ground. In those moments, their eyes met over the sweep of golden grass and distant hills, exchanging understanding without the need for extravagant gestures. A shared silence could convey more than 1,000 words, and gradually, Emma felt her heart tentatively opening. Yet, not all eyes looked kindly upon their connection. Rumors rippled through Haven's Hollow, painting Luke as a man of questionable intentions simply for showing care. Whispers followed Emma wherever she went, prickling at her skin like the first chill of an approaching storm. The prairie itself seemed to echo the tension, a horizon heavy with clouds, winds picking up in restless gusts, the distant rumble of thunder warning of a tempest to come. One evening, that storm finally arrived. Rain pelted the prairie in relentless sheets, wind tugging at the eaves of her cabin and rattling the windows. Emma huddled inside, heart pounding, unsure how she would manage if the storm worsened. A sudden knock echoed through the rain, then the creak of the door. Luke, soaked to the bone, had ridden through the tempest to ensure she was safe. They gathered near the hearth, the fire's warmth cutting through the damp chill. Luke's presence was calm, steady, and protective. They spoke little, exchanging glances that conveyed more than conversation could. A hand brushed against hers as he passed her a blanket. A tentative smile met the corner of his lips. In those shared intimate moments, Emma felt hope bloom like the first fragile shoots of spring. Gratitude mingled with a tender longing, a sense that perhaps she could trust someone fully again. The storm continued outside, lightning tracing the sky, thunder rolling across the prairie. Inside, however, time seemed to stretch, suspended in the quiet rhythm of companionship. Luke's admiration for her resilience became palpable. Emma recognized the strength in his steady gaze. Their bond deepened not through grand declarations, but in gestures measured, genuine, and heartfelt. As the storm subsided, the prairie glistened under the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the clouds. Emma rested her head slightly against the window frame, breathing in the scent of rain-soaked grass, feeling an ember of courage and connection that had not been there before. She no longer felt entirely alone. Luke had arrived, not just as a presence, but as a quiet force of hope and protection. And though the town's whispers would not cease, she realized that within the shelter of this growing trust, she could begin to imagine a life of her own choosing. The morning sun spilled gold across Haven's Hollow, dust motes drifting lazily in the light. Emma tightened her shawl and adjusted the hem of her dress, taking a deep breath as she approached the orphanage. The wooden sign creaked in the gentle wind, and the faint chatter of children spilled from the windows. She paused briefly, steeling herself against the whispers she imagined lingering in the town square. Each step carried a mixture of fear and resolve, her boots scuffing the dirt path as she entered the small yard. Inside, the children were scattered among mismatched tables and worn chairs, some drawing with stubby pencils, others tending to small tasks. Emma's presence was quiet yet purposeful. She knelt to help a boy struggling to tie his shoes, smoothing the rough leather laces with patient fingers. She guided a group of girls through an exercise in reading, her soft voice carrying over the murmur of the room. These small acts of care were deliberate, an assertion that her worth was not defined by judgment or whispers. Slowly, the children responded with trust, laughter, and shy smiles, and even the town's more skeptical eyes began to notice her quiet courage. Luke arrived shortly after, riding along the dusty path that ran beside the orphanage. His horse's hooves kicked up small clouds of sand as he dismounted with practiced ease. Without fanfare, he offered Emma a hand with a stack of freshly delivered flour sacks. As their fingers brushed, a spark of warmth passed between them, a fleeting yet unmistakable connection. No words were needed. The touch, subtle and intentional, spoke volumes. Together, they moved through the daily routines, their gestures and shared glances forming a language of trust and intimacy. During a short ride across the prairie later that afternoon, Luke spoke quietly of past hardships, times when the wind carried away his plans, when the prairie seemed endless and lonely. Emma listened, heart softening, recognizing in him the same quiet resilience she nurtured within herself. They spoke of hopes rather than judgments, of what they might build together instead of what had been lost. Occasionally, their hands met in passing, lingering for a heartbeat before retreating, each touch strengthening a bond neither dared define fully. A loud tension escalated when the rumble of carriage wheels announced her father's arrival in town. The estranged man, red-faced with anger and authority, had come to impose humiliation publicly. Emma's stomach knotted, her breath catching as whispers swelled around her like a rising tide. Yet she did not falter. Luke stepped forward, placing a steadying hand near her elbow, not to shield, but to signal unwavering support. Together, they confronted her father in the town square, Emma standing tall, head lifted despite the storm of gossip and disapproving stares. "Emma," her father barked, voice dripping with shame, "this town will not endure your recklessness. You should leave." "I will not run," she said, voice steady, eyes unwavering. "I have made my choices, and I will live them with dignity." Luke's hand brushed hers subtly as he said nothing, letting his presence communicate what words could not: loyalty, strength, and protection. The townsfolk watched, curiosity mingling with surprise, as a woman refused to bow and a man stood unwavering beside her. Murmurs softened. Tentative respect began to replace judgment in some hearts. The seeds of acceptance were sown in silence and courage, not loud declarations. By evening, the prairie wind carried a different tone. Emma rode back along the sunlit paths, the glow highlighting her resolute expression. Luke's shadow stretched beside her, constant and reassuring. In that quiet companionship, hope grew. Their connection, grounded in trust and shared small moments, hinted at a love forming not in grand gestures, but in the authenticity of actions, patience, and respect. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt the thrill of agency and possibility. She was no longer merely surviving in the eyes of others. She was living, quietly courageous, and slowly, intentionally, building a life and a heart worth claiming. The prairie stretched endlessly beneath a sky ablaze with gold and crimson, the late afternoon sun dipping low behind distant hills. Emma walked along the familiar dirt path, the soft rustle of prairie grass brushing against her dress, carrying the faint scent of wildflowers and dust. Her thoughts were tangled, memories of whispered gossip and cautious glances from townsfolk, mixing uneasily with the warmth she had begun to feel in Luke's presence. From the horizon came the steady clip-clop of hooves. Soft against the dry earth, Luke emerged, silhouetted against the fiery sky, a figure of calm determination. The golden light haloed his broad shoulders, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over eyes that seemed to see directly into her heart. As he approached, he spoke quietly, his voice a soothing cadence in the evening air. "Emma," he began, pausing as the wind tugged gently at her hair, "I've watched you walk through shame, through whispers, and yet you never let them break you. God knows you're mine, and that's enough." Her chest tightened, and for a moment, she could not speak. The sincerity in his eyes, the steady cadence of his words, and the way his hand hovered near hers without pressing or demanding it, all spoke louder than any sermon or gossip ever could. She felt the blush creeping to her cheeks, but beneath it, a fragile thread of trust began to weave itself into her heart. They walked side by side across the prairie, their shoulders nearly touching, the distance between them charged with a quiet intimacy. Luke spoke of small things, dreams of a home filled with laughter, a life where children could grow unafraid, and the resilience required to navigate hardships. Emma shared her own fears, the silent nights spent wrestling with shame, and the hope that she might still belong somewhere, with someone who saw her truth. Occasionally, their hands brushed a casual pass of fingers while picking up a fallen branch or adjusting the reins of a horse, but each contact carried the weight of unspoken understanding. They laughed softly at the prairie jokes, Luke murmured under his breath, the sound mingling with the evening wind. In these moments, words were secondary. The trust building in glances, gestures, and shared silences spoke volumes. Back in Haven's Hollow, news of their growing closeness spread like wildfire. Some of the elders frowned deeply, murmuring about tradition and the impropriety of her pregnancy, while others watched with curiosity and admiration. Luke's courage, quiet and steadfast, and Emma's refusal to shrink beneath scrutiny, began to inspire grudging respect. Even her mother, who had once kept her distance, softened as she observed her daughter's steady strength and the man who honored it with his unwavering loyalty. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the prairie. Luke stopped beside a gentle rise, turning to face her fully, His expression was earnest, a calm intensity in the golden haze. "I cannot change what others say, Emma, but I can stand with you, side by side, not out of pity, not to rescue you, but because I see your worth, and I choose you." Emma swallowed hard, feeling the truth in every word. She sensed the patience in him, the respect for her boundaries, and the encouragement for her to step forward in her own strength. Her lips curved into a small, genuine smile, and her hand brushed against his, lingering just a heartbeat longer than necessity. It was not grand, it was not loud, but it was everything. They continued across the open prairie, the wind carrying hints of rain from distant clouds. The tension that had shadowed her steps for weeks seemed to lift. Here, in this golden twilight, the promise of trust and love began to bloom. The whispers of judgment faded into the background, replaced by the resonance of courage and the quiet affirmation of mutual devotion. By the time the first stars appeared, Emma's heart had settled into a rhythm it had not known in months. She was beginning to believe that she could step forward without shame, that love need not be bound by the whispers of a town, and that together, she and Luke could carve a life defined by choice, courage, and quiet joy. Dark clouds gathered over Havens Hollow as the late afternoon sun struggled to break through the gathering storm. The prairie wind whipped dust along the streets, rattling shutters and tossing stray papers across the square. Townsfolk moved cautiously, their murmurs blending with the distant rumble of thunder. Within the town hall, tension thickened like the approaching storm, every chair, creak and whispered word echoing off wooden walls. Emma entered, steady despite the churn of anxiety in her chest. Her dress, simple yet dignified, swayed slightly with each step. Her eyes scanned the room, noting familiar faces turned wary, curious, and in some cases, judgmental. At the front, her father stood, his posture rigid, jaw tight, red with anger and shame. He had summoned the townspeople, hoping to publicly assert control over the scandal he believed she represented. Luke arrived quietly, slipping in beside her without fanfare. He did not speak, did not demand attention. His presence, Alan strong, unwavering, protective, was a silent declaration that she would not face this alone. His hand brushed hers as she adjusted her shawl, a small gesture of comfort and solidarity. Together, they were a steady front against the tide of gossip and expectation. Her father's voice cut through the charged air. "Emma, you've brought disgrace upon this town, and I will not allow it to continue." Emma lifted her chin, drawing in a breath that carried both courage and resolve. "Father," she began, voice clear and measured, "I am carrying life. I have made my choices, and I will live with dignity. I will not shrink beneath shame, nor allow whispers to dictate my worth." The room stilled. Dust swirled faintly in a shaft of light cutting through the storm-clouded windows, lightning briefly illuminating tense faces. Thunder echoed like a drumbeat, punctuating her words, lending them weight. Townsfolk shifted, some glancing down at the floor, others watching with newfound respect. Luke's steady gaze never wavered from her. He offered no interruption, only the quiet strength of presence. When Emma's eyes flicked to him, she found reassurance. His hand found hers again, fingers entwining briefly, grounding her as she spoke her truth. Together, their gestures conveyed mutual respect, trust, and shared courage. Slowly, the tide of judgment began to ebb. An elder seated near the back inclined his head, a subtle nod of acknowledgement for Emma's bravery. A small child, clutching a tattered doll, stepped forward and offered his hand, which she accepted gently, her touch kind and confident. These tiny gestures rippled outward, small acts of reconciliation signaling the first glimmers of community acceptance. Outside, the storm finally broke, rain cascading over the streets and sending the lingering dust into a shimmering haze. Lightning forked across the sky, then dissipated, leaving a sense of cleansing in its wake. The prairie beyond the town shimmered under the first hints of sunlight breaking through grey clouds. It mirrored the transformation within the hall. Tension had passed, leaving room for clarity, understanding, and hope. Emma exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of fear lift from her shoulders. She turned to Luke, who offered only a small, knowing smile, eyes soft, yet filled with admiration. There were no grand declarations, only the quiet acknowledgement of shared triumph and deepening trust. Here, amid the echoes of thunder and the calm after the storm, their bond solidified, not in passion alone, but in steadfastness, respect, and unwavering love, the townsfolk began to speak softly among themselves. Curiosity, tempered by new understanding, a conversation, a shared glance, a tentative smile, these were the first threads of community acceptance. Emma's dignity was restored, her courage visible in every measured step and calm gesture. Luke remained by her side, protective and attentive, a living promise that she would never face judgment alone. As the rain eased, and the prairie glistened under the softened light, Haven's Hollow felt a little warmer, a little gentler. Emma's heart, once burdened with shame and doubt, now carried hope. And as she left the town hall, hand resting lightly on Luke's, she felt certain that together they could weather any storm, literal or otherwise. The sun hung low over the prairie, casting a golden haze across the meadow where wildflowers swayed in gentle, whispered currents of wind. Emma stood among the tall grasses, her dress catching the sunlight in soft folds, the warmth of the evening caressing her skin. Around her, only a handful of townsfolk had gathered, neighbors whose curiosity had softened into quiet respect, their presence sincere rather than ceremonial. The distant toll of the church bell echoed through the prairie, a tender accompaniment to the gentle rustle of leaves and grass. Luke approached along the worn path, the glint of sunlight on his hat brim illuminating the calm determination in his eyes. His boots pressed into the earth with a quiet rhythm, every step deliberate, carrying him closer, not just to her side, but to a shared life they had fought to claim. When he stopped before her, their eyes met, and the unspoken understanding of all they had endured flowed between them. Whispers of storms weathered, challenges faced, and courage affirmed. "I vow," Luke began, his voice soft yet unwavering, "to honor you, to protect you, and to love you not because the world demands it, but because I see your worth every day, in every moment. God knows you're mine, and that is enough." Emma's lips curved into a gentle smile, her eyes glistening with quiet joy. She felt the weight of past shame lift fully, replaced by the light of dignity reclaimed. "And I vow," she replied, her voice steady, "to walk beside you, to trust you, and to love you in return. Together, we face what comes." Our hearts and hands joined. A soft breeze drifted through the meadow, tousling their hair and carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. Their hands met, fingers intertwining with a natural ease that spoke of deep emotional connection. Shared smiles and lingering glances conveyed a fulfillment far richer than any outward display could offer. Each gesture, the gentle brush of a thumb across a knuckle, the quiet tilt of a head, the momentary squeeze of hands spoke volumes about the trust and intimacy that had grown steadily between them. Among the small gathering, some townsfolk exchanged glances of admiration, others nodded subtly, a recognition of courage and resilience rather than scandal. Emma's mother, standing quietly behind a weathered fence, allowed herself a small, proud smile. The journey from whispered judgment to heartfelt acceptance had been long, but the authenticity of the moment shone brighter than any gossip ever could. As the ceremony concluded, Luke offered Emma his arm, and together they walked across the meadow, their steps in harmony with the soft sway of prairie grasses. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, painted in shades of gold, orange, and lavender. A sense of completion settled over the scene. Lives mended, hearts aligned, and futures embraced with courage and hope. They mounted Luke's horse and rode side by side, Emma leaning slightly into his steady presence, her hand resting lightly atop his. The wind tugged at their hair, and the sun dipped further, casting long, warm shadows across the prairie. Intertwined hands, the gentle sway of their movements, and the soft glimmer of tears in Emma's eyes conveyed a profound emotional closure without need for grand gestures. In the distance, the prairie rolled endlessly, a world waiting for their shared story to unfold, a life filled with quiet laughter, steadfast loyalty, and a child yet to come. Every gust of wind, every whisper of grass, every glint of sunlight on Luke's hat and Emma's hair was a subtle testament to the journey they had taken, from isolation, shame, and fear to love, empowerment, and communal acceptance. As they rode toward the horizon, hearts synchronized and spirits unburdened, the camera lingers on the details, the wind-tossed strands of Emma's hair, their fingers intertwined, the soft radiance of hope in their eyes. The story closes not with spectacle, but with serenity. The golden prairie stretching infinitely before them, a canvas for a life built on trust, courage, and enduring love.